All right, folks, we're going to talk today about how one agency, Rocketship, grew a Christian academy in Washington 65%, changed their culture, improved recruiting and employee retention by getting rid of a lot of the old educational models. The rip and replace model, start using growth-driven design. And we talk about all the features that educational institutions need to have, what's the best platform for them, how to create amazing content that gets shared, and using the long tail. But Shannon, thanks so much for being on. We're excited to get started.
My pleasure. Thanks, Ian.
And don't forget, this is brought to you by videocasestory.com. One of the best ways to grow any business, whether it's education or agency, is through your customer stories. Go to videocasestory.com to learn how to collect, craft, and deliver your customer stories. All right, let's get started. I'm super excited to talk about this. It's always fun to talk about growth, especially like in fun areas like education, and you help grow enrollments, traffic. And I think it's one of those things that people don't think a lot of digital marketing for something like a K through 8 academy, but you did it. Tell me a little bit about them and how you did it.
Well, we do a lot of work for schools and educational institutions, education service providers. But yeah, specifically, the one that I think would be good to talk about is this academy that's here in Everett, Washington, called North Shore Christian Academy. And the whole education space has been completely disrupted over the last few years. You know, the pandemic has affected so many different industries, but in education in particular, you know, with in-person and remote learning, and as the pandemic evolved and parents were like, oh, you know, gosh, I don't want to be in person. And then it was like, oh, I'm sick of not being in person and I got to get back in person. And maybe my public school is lagging or not lagging, you know? So, I mean, there's all kinds of movement, and it was really interesting to work with so many different clients that were experiencing different things based on where they were and what was going on in their area. But, you know, private schools are oftentimes looking to grow, you know, their enrollment. They don't have this sort of captive audience like the public schools do, you know, that where the district lines are drawn and you know, they're going to get their enrollment based on that. But private schools have to go out and make their case. You know, they have to think about branding. They have to think about what differentiates them and why is it worth the extra cost to go to private school. So enrollment and sustaining that growth is really big for them.
Yeah. And I guess if from the outside being a parent, you don't think about this. You're like, oh, schools are just schools. They just grow. They don't need marketing. But obviously, you know, if they're charging a lot of money, it's an alternate choice for a lot of people. And I'm sure there was a lot of frustration too, like you said, around the in school, not school. And then there was some marketing around that too, wasn't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so when this academy came to you, tell me, what was their problem? Why did they come to you all? I mean, obviously enrollments, but was there a specific issue?
And we started working with them prior to the pandemic. But yeah, when they came to us, they had a goal to their broad goal was to grow their enrollment. So they were kind of on a long-term strategic path to expand the school. You know, they were building new buildings and various things and wanted to grow their enrollment along with that. But they were just in a position where they were one of the larger private schools in the county, but they were really not getting that kind of credit in terms of their web presence. They were being outranked online by a lot of smaller private schools. And they just, you know, they had a really big website with a lot of content, but it wasn't well optimized. It wasn't well organized. And they just really weren't getting the credit and the web visibility that they should have had. And that, of course, was a barrier to them growing. So their website was kind of in a shambles at the time we started working together. They were in the process of doing an internal conversion from a proprietary platform over to Wix. And so they were midway in that process, and we got down that path, and I had to have a heart-to-heart with them and say, listen, before we go any further, we really need to reassess the platform here, because they were running into all kinds of barriers and walls with that platform. And so that's the first thing that we did, was we got them onto a platform that was really more scalable and flexible, that could grow with them. And that was more, did a better job with search engine optimization and flexibility of how they can arrange their content.
And when it comes to specifically to, I mean, there's a couple things there. Well, first of all, do you feel like educational institutions, especially of this size, or like maybe that are not quite into the digital age, underestimate how much potential parents and students are using online to judge them?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, I think as a category, generally education, we work across a lot of different categories and have built, hundreds and hundreds of websites over the years. And so we see what's going on in these different categories, but education, I think, is kind of a lagging category, in terms of their level of sophistication. And what's invested into the user experience and the branding and the look and the feel and that kind of thing. Private schools are better because they know that they have to go out and attract students, and that's how they survive. It's, again, going back to the public school thing. It's not automatic. It's actually not automatic on the public side anymore either, because of all of the choice and options that are out there. So this is one of those things that's being disrupted in the industry. But yeah, overall, I think there is an underestimation of how important the web presence is, and how parents and prospective parents are using the website to get the information they need and make choices. Is this the right environment for my child?
It's funny because I feel like it's one of those things that we all use the internet so much for everything and to like do all the research. But then we think when it comes to us, that research isn't happening. Yeah. And I see this across the board, even in, digital agencies that we work with. And it's like, have you looked at your online presence? Yeah, I know you look at your website, but have you looked at your online presence? And so when you're considering that piece, you're considering the web platform piece, and you said you had to make sure it was flexible enough and had SEO. What features, obviously SEO was a big one. What features do you feel education institutions need to have in a platform?
We work with a couple of different platforms predominantly. WordPress is one of those platforms. It's the one that's the most pervasive out there. It's open source. There's a huge developer community. And so there are plugins for virtually anything and everything that you would want to do. Schools, like other organizations in different categories, have some unique needs that they have. Maybe schools use things like calendaring features and plugins a little bit more heavily. Some of them will have like donation engines that they will need to use. Certainly managing the enrollment process. Sometimes there are multiple steps and stages in that. And so you have platforms that have tried to cater to the education space, and that's good. And then they pre-make some of those tools to be sort of turnkey. The problem that we've seen with that is that sometimes if those tools are not configured in the way that particular school needs or wants, they're kind of stuck, because they've created a closed platform, and it's like a piece of software. If you're using Microsoft Office and you think, gosh, I really wish that they would have such and such a feature. I mean, your best hope is to kind of put a request in and hope that it gets on the roadmap a year or two down the road or whatever, right? Whereas a platform like WordPress or a HubSpot's another platform that we just love, that are really built for growth, and they're much more scalable and flexible. So that's at least our unique approach, I think, is we can build anything, a calendar, a donation. I mean, that's not the problem. But what we find is that a lot of platforms lack the growth mechanisms, to build and grow, things like A/B testing. What calls to action should I use? how are people clicking? Are they finding the information that they want? Is it really usable? And being able to test and learn and have the reporting so that you can continually evolve your site to get better and better and better. That's where tools like or platforms like WordPress and HubSpot really excel compared to the industry specific ones like like a Final Site.
It's interesting. It's really interesting because, and it comes back to a point where, and I want to ask this, even in the specific case where a lot of times, especially if they're not spending a lot of time there, stakeholders in an institution, whether it's a business or a school, I feel have the wrong idea of what they need because they're just not experts in it. And so then they guide that platform to be built. Is that something you had to do here, where you had to guide them away from certain things that they wanted and to the things like you were saying, like CTAs that are so important, or testing that's so important?
Yeah. And like I said, we had to have that heart to heart because they were already, 50% of the way into that migration process. So there was some sunk cost there that they had to come to grips with.
Yeah.
But we showed them where this was becoming, where they were